Yeah, it's lovely to see everybody. Thank you for coming. As Nikki said, we've got Candida, who has come to talk to us today from Aquarius Ward, and I am just going to introduce her very quickly. So Candida has been an occupational therapist for over 40 years. She trained at Exeter University, and although occupational therapists are trained to work both in physical and mental health settings, she was always interested in mental health. Occupational therapy is a very broad profession, and the setting you work in can mean your job appears very different to that of another OT. But basically, we're all trying to make a patient as independent as they can be following an accident or ill health. She started working with adults and has worked in many settings, inpatient and community, long stay and acutely ill. And she changed to working with young people for a new challenge, and it has definitely fulfilled that. She has been on Aquarius Ward for 15 years and still really enjoys it, which I think is a real testament to your passion. And she feels working with young people is more hopeful than working with adults and more fun. So, I'll hand over to you.
Hello everybody, my name's Candida, and as you've heard all about me, I don't need to do any introduction of myself, but yes, I work on Aquarius Ward, which is in Springfield Hospital, and this is what Springfield looks like. Sadly now, all of the smart buildings are being turned into flats, and so we are rapidly losing all our green space, and so the hospital is getting sort of smaller and more crunched up as we speak. So, although it looks sort of like quite smart and quite nice, this lawn is very different to all the other lawns in Springfield because this is privately owned. Yes, I do love my job. I have been there for years and years. I think there's 3 people who've been on Aquarius Ward the same amount or longer than me, so I'm not quite the longest, so that's great. But no, I just really like it. I love all the kids, not all the time, all the kids, but most of the time they're really fun to work with. And I think probably I've kept my sanity because I'm only part-time, so I do it 3 times a week, 3 days a week, and I can cycle to work, so it can sort of fit in with work, with life really mostly, so that's great. We've talked a little bit about OT and what it is. So basically when you're working with the kids that I work with, they're very different to if I could go and work in sort of St George's Hospital and work with people who've had strokes, and that's very different to my job, but the end result is always going to be the same. We're aiming to get people to be sort of as independent as they can be and get as much out of life as they possibly can. Yes, we have got a ward within this old Victorian building. So it's a long way from being purpose-built. It's sort of okay, but actually if you were going to design a unit for kids, you would not design it as it is. We've got a school on the ground floor, and then the ward is on the first floor. The lift was put in about 5 years ago when someone realised that we completely didn't comply with any regulations at all by not having one, but actually it hardly ever works, so that really hasn't made much of a difference. So Aquarius is an acute admission ward. I'm not quite sure how many of you have sort of been to adolescent units. Okay, if I'm telling you things you already know, just please shut me up. So it's an acute admission ward, which basically means the turnover is pretty quick. We're a ward for kids, so they're between 12 and 18, and they've all got treatable mental health illnesses. So that means that we don't have kids with sort of conduct disorder, or we have kids with autism, but actually they would have an illness that we could treat alongside it. We don't see children with eating disorders because at Springfield there is another ward that just does eating disorders, so we're everything else basically. So we've got 12 beds, and they are divided into 6 boys, 6 girls. Sometimes, historically I guess, we have more girls than boys. I think that's the case with nearly every adolescent unit. And so sometimes, although it is divided up, we have to sort of stick girls in the boys' corridor when there aren't any boys. We've also got 1 bedroom that's neither in girls nor boys, which was a sort of planning anomaly. But actually is quite useful because we're getting an increasing number of sort of transgender kids, and we're never really too sure which area to put them in or what's going to be the most appropriate. So kids on the whole stay maybe 6 weeks with us, so it's quite fast. Some literally come in and out within the space of a weekend, and others, if they stay longer, it's not usually because they need to stay on the ward, it's because we can't get them out, because social services are trying to find them a placement, and the trouble is with a child on an inpatient unit, they're never going to get to the top of social services list, because they're safe, they're looked after, they're being fed, and that's really, and if they're almost 18, you can forget it. Because actually children's social services will think to themselves, that's fine, if we hang it out for another 6 months, we don't have to worry about them, they're not our problem anymore. So that's really horrible for the kids, because they obviously see everyone else coming and going, but that's why they on the whole get stuck. If anyone's got any questions, ask me as I go along.
Excuse me, can I just, I think we're having some messages, and I think maybe if you stood a bit closer to the computer, that might possibly help the people online. Thank you so much.
What's the matter with the kids when they come in? Like I said, we have the sort of range of mental health problems. So we get children who come in with psychotic illnesses. That might be schizophrenia, it might be bipolar disorder, or it might be drug-induced psychosis. We get kids who come in because they're depressed. You can't actually diagnose a child with personality disorder, but so we have to say they've got emerging unstable personality disorder. They have anxiety, and as well as this, like I said before, they might be on the autism spectrum, and they might have ADHD, but that wouldn't be their only problem. We wouldn't see them only for that. So basically, the children we see, we've got a list of symptoms, and they're not always sort of like clearly linked up with their illnesses. I mean, I think they could all have a smattering of all these symptoms, and you can't, I think psychiatry is probably, it's so much less black and white than physical medicine, so one person with psychotic illness is going to be very, very different to somebody else. But on the whole, it's common to see children being very withdrawn. They might find it really hard to talk to anybody, to their friends. They might not have any friends, to their families, staff on the ward. They could be very sad and tearful. A lot of children are sort of emotionally all over the place, and so we say they're dysregulated, which is a bit the sort of term of the month, I guess, year, not month. So they're sort of all over the place, basically. Little things really set them off. They get very anxious very quickly, they get very upset very quickly. They think that their emotions come completely out of the blue, and they can't spot triggers which are going to make them feel like this, so it feels like their lives are emotionally very out of control. On the whole, they have had very isolated lives. They've probably withdrawn from school, and socially they've lost touch with their friends, or they don't really go out with their friends anymore, so they're going to be living relatively sad lives when they come to us. Probably some of them won't have come out of their bedroom, a lot won't have come out of the house for many weeks. There'll be issues at school. Schools vary an awful lot in how good they are at spotting mental health problems and dealing with them. Some schools are great, some are actually too good, and they sort of get kids out of classes at the drop of a hat and put them in a lovely little room with nice music and a nurse, and you think actually that's really not helpful, because we're never going to get that kid back into the classroom because they're having a very lovely time sitting having a cup of tea with a nurse. So there's quite a lot, we do quite a lot of liaising with schools trying to get the balance right. Like I said, they're going to have friendship issues, they're going to be anxious possibly. Kids with psychotic illnesses are going to perhaps have hallucinations, so they might see things, hear things, taste things, feel things that aren't really there, which obviously makes life very scary. And they've often got very strange delusional ideas in their heads. We've got a boy at the moment who is entirely sure that the police are after him, to the extent of being able to hear helicopters on the ward, at home. He ran away from home last week because he saw a light in his bedroom at night time and thought that this was obviously a helicopter, so he ran away from home. I'm not really quite sure the logic of that, of leaving your house when there's a helicopter looking for you, but anyway, to him it all made perfect sense, and so he ran off and was picked up by the police. All of them probably are going to have concentration difficulties, and that really is a symptom of every illness that we see on the ward. That's going to be problematic at school. But even like in hobbies and doing things that they enjoy, they're not really going to be able to focus on it for anywhere near as long as they did before. If a child has got ASD, autistic spectrum disorder, they are going to have a very rigid way of seeing the world. So they find any change quite difficult, which really doesn't mean it's easy on an inpatient ward where there's a great big staff team. We've all got slightly different opinions. We might all give them slightly different instructions, slightly different explanations of what the day is going to look like, which they find very, very difficult indeed. They like timetables, and so everything's got to be sort of as black and white as we can make it, and with no ambiguity about it at all. Also, another issue on a ward is the fact it's noisy. There's 12 kids, the doors bang, there's fire alarms, there's panic alarms going off all the time, so if you're sensitive to noise, being on a ward really isn't great. The lights are all bright, like in here, so some children with ASD find it difficult to have bright lights and some busy environments, which again is like a ward. And also textures are difficult. Sometimes they can't wear certain clothes, and taste. Obviously, they can't have a special diet on Aquarius. We get parents to bring things in as much as we can, but fundamentally they're going to have to eat hospital food. So, which is not great at the best of times, but if you've got ASD, sometimes you've got very particular things you like to eat and don't like to eat, so that makes it all the more difficult. That's a little bit about the kids. The catchment area, Springfield is in Tooting, that's southwest London, and it covers 7 boroughs. So we've got 7 boroughs that kids can come from. It can take like a couple of hours for parents to drive in from the far end of the catchment area. So it's not like on everybody's doorstep, but we also get a lot of children who come from far, far afield. There's always a shortage of adolescent beds in England, so we've had people from Portsmouth, Isle of Wight, Norfolk, sort of all over basically. And then obviously it's really hard for us to deal with them because we can't pop to their school, their family can't come and see them, it's much more easy for them to lose touch with everybody. On the ward, staffing wise, we've got a consultant psychiatrist and a ward manager. This is probably the same as every adolescent unit actually. We've got some ward doctors, there's OTs like me, psychologists, social worker, family therapists, and a team of nurses and healthcare assistants. So we're quite a multidisciplinary team. We don't have art therapy or drama therapy. That's sort of thought it to be a bit of a sort of extra for an adolescent ward, which is sad, which is why create people where they come in is all for the good. We've also got an outreach team, which is a large team that basically has the job of keeping kids out of hospital, so they can visit children every day, but they only do the 7 local boroughs. So if a child comes from further away, they don't get the advantage of the outreach team. They can do quite a lot of intensive work to keep kids out, but they can also help us get kids out of hospital quicker because they will be able to visit a child at home every day to make sure that they're sort of following up what the ward has started. And so that, yes, I suppose it feels quite unfair because some kids can go earlier because they've got this team and some kids can't because they haven't. So I think probably sometimes I do an assessment and I sort of realise that a child finds it really difficult to, walk down their high street, use a bus, go to school, and so I can pass that on to the outreach team, and then the kid can leave hospital, and then the outreach team can do all the work about getting that child more able to do things they find hard. Timetable, is that the next one?
Yeah.
What happens day to day on an adolescent ward? Basically, we've got the school as well. The school covers all the adolescent units. So there's us, there's an eating disorder unit, and there's a deaf CAMS unit. And the kids have got a really full timetable. So it's very structured, and every morning we get them up at a reasonable time, and they have to come to the morning meeting, which is when we go through what's happening that day. And then they go to school every morning. The school, it's quite tricky. I mean, it is pretty hard for the school. They've got a whole load of different ages of kids, and they're all at different functioning levels, but they do a really good job of trying to include as many of them as they can in the lessons. So they have lessons and then a break, and then if you scroll down, and then the afternoon carries on. So you can see their day is really full. We squeeze groups into the timetable. It's a sort of dovetailed week between us doing groups on the ward and school. There's always a little bit of friction between OTs trying to run groups and school trying to run lessons on wards. I think that's historical everywhere. I feel quite strongly that actually if a child is in hospital, they do need to come to some groups, otherwise they could be at school. And actually school are, I think really our school are pretty good at managing to sort of have me saying, so it's not going to be in their lesson today. So if I want to see a child and assess them for something, I'll obviously have to take them out of school, and that's sort of okay with school just. So I run a group called Coping Skills, which is all about managing emotions. We also have we probably don't do a baking or a cooking group. We do art, they go to the gym. We do quite a lot of getting them to think about what their goal for the week is going to be. And so tea and reflection on Friday is sort of like how they got on with that goal. So it's a mixture of sort of learning groups, talking groups, sort of like getting them to think about their own goals. So that's sort of term time. And then obviously everything goes very different in the holidays. We look at the next. Yeah, in holidays, it's very much up to OTs. So at the beginning of the summer holidays, I'm really thinking, oh my goodness. But anyway, we do manage to get through it. It just basically is group in the morning, group in the afternoon, every day of the holiday. And so they tend to be more fun things. I mean, you can still learn a lot about how a child is from doing art groups or going for a walk. We do quite a lot of cooking. We take them out in a van, and we like go ice skating on this day. So there's quite a lot of fun things, but actually they're all sort of assessment-y type stuff as well. We can learn quite a lot about the kids. And so it's me all the time, basically, morning, afternoon, which is why when Create come, it's just a breath of fresh air, and I can have a bit of a breather, because I think, yay, we've got Create this afternoon, I don't have to worry about what we're going to be doing. So this time, I think Create came in the afternoon on this timetable, yay, photography workshop. So that is really great, because someone comes in, they know what they're talking about, they have got all these skills that the kids don't know anything about, they bring amazing equipment, so it's not like sort of crappy hospital, stuff that we normally have to sort of really cobble together things or ask for freebies, but actually they come in with all the skills and all the talents, so that is really great. I was asked to talk about COVID. I was saying to Nikki earlier, I think, yes, it was really difficult at the time, but I do think actually now we've bounced back, and the effects of COVID probably are probably fairly indiscernible at the moment. When it actually was in the middle of lockdown, it was really hard, because for a child with ASD, like I said, and their rigidity and their way of doing things, all of those things went out the window. All the things that kept life going normally, on the things they usually did on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday had all gone. So they found it really hard, and we had an entire ward of ASD kids as a result. They couldn't have any leave, because if we let them home, they would have to isolate in their very small bedrooms for 4 days or until the COVID test came back. So that was really impossible to manage on an inpatient unit. So we sort of kept leave to a minimum, but that also meant that we couldn't try out home. So if we thought, well, maybe this person will manage at home, we couldn't actually give it a go like we normally would and sort of say go home for a day, weekend, week, whatever. So we were sort of making sort of fairly split-second decisions about, okay, this child, let's go, we'll go for it, we'll discharge them. And then obviously, needless to say, they came back. So the whole ward was sort of like the same kids going, trying home, back again. Also, we obviously couldn't take them out. We went for many walks in Battersea Park that summer holiday, and we couldn't really do anything more than that. So yes, it really was quite difficult. And as well as that, the things that make life fun at home were obviously not there. So the sort of clubs and organisations and things that they used to do before COVID had disappeared. So it was quite hard to get a depressed kid home with any sort of hope of enjoyment, because actually all the things that they were enjoying were no longer possible. So it was really quite a challenging time. And as well as that, I guess the families were going to be super stressed and working from home, and obviously they had their kids around all the time, so the whole stress in the family went up, and that emotionally was not great for a child with mental health problems as well. So moving on to the Create workshops themselves, I was just wondering what any of your aims would be. If you sort of came to do a workshop on a ward like ours, I was just wondering if anyone had any ideas of what their sort of aims would be for the workshop.
As you were saying about the school having a difficult job at times because you've got different levels and different abilities, different functional capacities, I was thinking that what makes a successful project can vary from participant to participant. Maybe for one person it's like producing an amazing photograph, but maybe we've had someone on Aquarius ward who's joined in for 5 minutes, and that has been a really big deal for them, and has been really successful outcome of the project. They're just doing that one day. So I think it's maybe more difficult than other projects to assess what success is. Yeah. It's on such an individual basis.
I feel like kind of go with that as well, autonomy and choice. So kind of maybe setting up the space a bit differently, or the fact of having those stations and things that can engage in different ways. So a way of having a bit more of an open space, there's that element of choice that each activity can engage, but it's not, I wouldn't force you to kind of do it at the same pace as everyone else, and maybe explore something about that and about autonomy and having that ability to just actually sort of sit and observe everyone in the space.
Because the kid doesn't have much choice on Aquarius, realistically. Yeah. They can't even choose when to have their phone, what to have for lunch. All the normal things that a kid can choose, they actually can't on the ward, so that's important, yeah. I'll run through what I think the aims could be. And the first one I think is enjoyment. I think when you come and you've got a different interesting skill that the kids would just love to try, I think that's number one aim for everything. I was talking to Nikki earlier about learning a skill, and yes, they could, but I think you're in the very, very beginning stages of learning a skill. So, you're not going to get a kid in 5 afternoon workshops to be able to do anything enormously complicated very competently, but actually sometimes you can sow a seed of that idea, and they can discover that actually they do like this, and they can take a photo, and we've seen some amazing results of kids who their confidence has grown because they've actually sang a song, Emma singing her song and it's recorded, and then they play it back, and I think actually it makes them realise, oh wow, I actually can do this. Because if you ask the majority of kids on Aquarius, I always do when they come in, what their good qualities are, what their skills are, they always say nothing. You're never really going to get kids saying, yeah, I'm great at this, or very rarely. So I think sort of sowing the seed of that is really great. The interaction between them is really different, I think, sometimes in a workshop, because like you were saying about sort of they can work together, they can collaborate. Sometimes they're doing things on their own, but sometimes they're doing things in little groups, and that's really good too. Concentration, I said, was an issue, and yes, if they're really enjoying something, we sometimes have amazing concentration in the workshops, far better than school or groups, because they're just really interested in what they're doing. They can just sometimes be distracted, which is fine, that's great in itself, because they have a pretty horrible life on Aquarius, realistically. Some of them love it, which is even more of a worry, but actually I think distracting them and getting away from the boring ward life, I think is really important, so that's another one. Self-esteem and confidence go up if they create something. On the whole, we've always had artists who've been amazingly positive about slightly dubious end results, which they get, and that is really important. If they can go back to the ward, especially if they can show what they've done, or have nurses, staff in the ward coming down and hey, look at what they've done, that's great. So important things. So they're main. Can anyone think of anything else? I mean, that probably isn't a finite list of everything that your workshops could aim for. So anyone else can think of anything else, that please shout it out. In a practical way, important things for a person running a workshop to bear in mind. I thought I'd just run through things that probably maybe we take as second nature, but maybe if you're coming in it sort of feels all a bit scary and you don't really quite know what you should be thinking about. So I think really your instructions need to be very clear. I mean, these kids there's a hell of a lot going on in these kids' heads, both from inside the hospital and outside the hospital, and they're really not going to be thinking very clearly. So you need to be really clear, and you need to be exuding confidence so that they really can believe that you know what you're doing. Because they're a challenging lot, and the one we had a photography workshop recently, and there was really a child who wasn't challenged, but actually she could engage at times, but it was a lot of work for the artist. I think she probably found it quite hard. So you need to be really clear what you're doing and really enthusiastic that isn't this fun, and let's all really enjoy our afternoon together. Actually, having said that, I think sometimes workshops aim to be all day or longer than we can manage. I think the first time you came, Ollie, it was sort of like meant to be from 1 till 5, and I said realistically we're never going to manage that. So I mean, we sort of literally say from 2 till 4, which actually just gives everybody a bit more time to sort of organise and think about things and talk afterwards. You're never going to get an inpatient load of kids sitting in a workshop from like 1 till 5. It's not going to happen. So don't even try, because it'll be really, I think if it sort of fizzles out towards the end of the afternoon, you don't leave on a high as well. So I think it's a bit like, oh God, everyone else is gone, I better go as well, type of feeling for the kids who are left at the end, and that's not really nice. Obviously, safety is a big issue. Confidentiality, thinking about, we wouldn't let you take photos of the kids' faces. We would expect you not to sort of gossip about who was on the ward on the train home, not that you would at all. But I just think that is such an enormous issue on an inpatient ward. Any safeguarding concerns would obviously have to be thought about as well. The importance of engagement, that's really a lot of your effort is going to be trying to engage these probably slightly challenging kids. And if you put loads of effort into engagement and less into something else, well, that's great, that doesn't matter, because I think getting them engaged is really important. I think you need to come along with quite a good plan of what you're going to do, but on the other hand, it's also really, this is going to sound really contradictory, but if they clearly don't want to do your plan, you've got to have the ability to be flexible, which is a bit, it does sound a bit contradictory, because I'm sort of saying, you really got a plan, but actually on the other hand, go off it. If it's not working, there's no advantage at all of bulldozering through your plan if you haven't got any of the kids on board. I think this is probably the case with all patients, but especially with kids. They do need to have some form of ownership about what they're doing, and you need to work collaboratively with them. So if they all say, we don't want to do what you're doing, well, you've sort of basically got to think on your feet a bit and have something else up your sleeve. So having some commitment and trying to stay focused for you is really important, and trying to include all the kids as well. There's obviously going to be some who are going to be sitting over in the corner, head in hands, or sort of, kicking a ball around that they happen to find in the room, and quite a lot of your effort will be taken in trying to include everybody, even if it's in a tiny way. Just try and get them feel included, because they don't really want to be excluded, but it's sometimes really difficult for kids to join in and be part of the group. Motivation is going to be a big issue. We on the ward put a huge amount of effort into getting these kids downstairs. Shall I actually go to the classroom one and then I'll show you. We've got aquariums on the first floor, schoolroom in the downstairs. That's why I keep on saying upstairs and downstairs, which doesn't make any sense unless you know what I'm talking about. So this is the classroom. So it's really handy that obviously you always come in school holidays. So we have got this big space with lots of windows, sinks, whatever, a whiteboard. So that we have to put a lot of effort into getting the kids to come down to school in the holidays to do your workshop. So it's really good if you can carry on doing that, being that motivating person when they're down there, simply by sort of being positive and making it as fun as you can be. So before you run a workshop, I think it's really good if you sort of know the space you've got. We are lucky. I don't know whether every unit can use school like we can. I have absolutely no idea. But we do have this room, which is big, spacious, got bits and pieces around we can use. And it's also a sort of a contained room. I think we have tried to run workshops actually on the ward. There are advantages of that. But having it down in school with the door shut, it's a nice peaceful environment. We can have music if we want. Nobody comes and goes through it. The kids might come and go in and out, but actually nobody's using it as a thoroughfare. When we run groups on the ward, that's great because it's more inclusive. And even the kids who are pretty mad as hatters, in inverted commas, can sort of sit in for like 2 or 3 minutes. But on the other hand, everyone is coming and going, the alarm's going off, there are nurses running backwards and forwards, and it's really hard to run a group in somewhere like that. So I definitely always try and run them downstairs in the schoolroom. It's also quite nice and spacious, and sort of the kids, there is space, like you were saying, to have little things in various corners, and so we can do different little activities. But I guess, yeah, the disadvantage of having it downstairs that we don't get kids who really are not utterly able to engage, join in, because they have to stay up on the ward. So not every child on Aquarius will definitely come down to the workshop at all. They'll be sort of fairly teased out on the ward, so you get ones who, in theory, could join in. You need to think about what facilities that you need in a very practical way. And so decide whether you do need to have somewhere with a sink or windows or outside space or the whiteboard. Some places might not be able to provide you with all of those things, so it's important that you know in advance whether you have got a sink or you haven't got a sink, or there is a space outside or there isn't space outside. Think about the workshop length, like I said earlier. And probably talk to the OT on the ward or any of the nursing staff to actually find out who you're likely to get and any problems that they've got specifically, anything that you've got to watch out for. I think if you feel like you know a little bit about the kids beforehand, that makes you feel a bit more confident about who you're dealing with. There's also some kids might get really sort of triggered, especially dysregulated kids who might sort of go off into some sort of meltdown because you've mentioned something or they've thought about something. And so if there are triggers that set kids off, it's really good that you know about them in advance. Any particular safety concerns? We often have, sometimes we have workshops where we can have scissors out, torches. We had an issue with a torch, and sort of things out, and it's no problem at all. On another, if you came 2 weeks later, it might be completely different, and we really wouldn't be able to have a scissor in sight. Or if we did have a scissor, they'd be counted out, counted in. So you've got to be aware of the general sort of safety area, sort of like issues around on the ward at the time. The numbers you can cope with, that's another one, because sometimes, we could have 12 kids on the wall, all of whom want to come and join in, but you might think, oh my goodness, I can't cope with anywhere near that number. So you need to say how many you think you can manage safely, and you'll have staff from the ward helping. but it's really good to know whether you think what number is useful and good for you to work with. Some kids, I think it's really difficult sometimes if you're running a workshop and kids don't come down, and I think it's important not to get disheartened by the fact that, you know, so-and-so came down yesterday and they're not coming down today, but that really doesn't reflect the workshop in any way, shape or form on the whole. Sometimes kids just might be having a bad day. They might have, I don't know, they might have hurt themselves the evening before and everyone is a bit more worried about them, so it might not be allowed downstairs to school. They might be too ill. We have a lot of kids who are really too psychotic to even attempt engagement. And sometimes there's going to be meetings they have to go to. We have obviously regular meetings with the kids. So don't get disheartened if you've got a whole load of, you know, 5 kids one day and then only 3 turn up the next. That's not a reflection on the workshop. And so as a result of that also, I think in an ideal world it'd be so lovely to have sort of 10 kids on day 1 and the same 10 still on day 5. That is never going to happen. I mean, it'd be very nice to have, build on each day and sort of complete the project, and by the end of the week you have a lovely demonstration, a sort of like display of all your work. Realistically, forget it. Don't even aim for that. Each session has got to be a standalone session, basically. If you're lucky, you'll get kids who follow them all through, but don't aim for that. So it's really important that you recognise the fact that you're probably not going to have the same little audience every day. You need to also suss out how much support the ward is going to give you. I mean, we always have at least me and an OT assistant, and probably a healthcare assistant as well, down with someone from Create and the artist. So there's a lot of adults around. I don't know whether that's the case with all wards, but I think it's really important that you know that you've got some support. And also then, if there's a kid who wants to be taken out, or just needs a bit of a breather and go walk around outside for a bit, you've got someone to do it, and it's not really a big panic. You've got to find access and parking, really practical things like that, because Springfield's a maze, and it can take quite a long time to get from the car park to the classroom, and maybe you've got loads of clunky equipment you want to take. I mean, just really practically, if you can do a trial run before you come, that's great, because then you know what you're up against. Some places there's actually no parking, so you've got to sort of think again around that. The risks I mentioned earlier, we have got to be careful. There probably will be a child who wants to self-harm or just tantalisingly sort of sneak a pair of scissors into their pocket. So be careful with scissors, knives, batteries, any length of anything, ribbon, string. And we've got a load of kids at the moment. I mean, it's very contagious. I mean, you could get one child who snaps a felt tip and then puts half a felt tip in their pocket, and then someone else sees a felt tip, so they've done it as well. And it is terribly catching. So just be aware of the fact that if there's any child who's likely to put a felt tip in their pocket or snap a biro into, you're aware of it. Some kids will need special help, so if there's anybody who you know is going to need special help, it's quite good to know that in advance so that you can at least think and plan your workshop around that. We had a girl recently who went into spasms with her hands. Do you remember? There was nothing physically the matter, it was all emotional, but obviously it was slightly off-putting for the poor musician who was trying to run a workshop, because we had this kid down who couldn't literally move her hands, and the ward's attitude was downplay it, try and ignore as much as we can, then it shall come out of it and be able to join in. But this looked slightly disconcerting to the musician who was running the workshop, like, oh, no, this is a really caring team, this team working with this girl. It was all sort of planned out, but it was really good to know that in advance for the person running the workshop. So they're the things to sort of suss out in advance, and then I was just going to run through things to do on the day. I don't know whether that would be vaguely useful. So has anyone got any ideas of actually on the day, really things that are important to think about? We haven't covered already?
I've been to a few different wards now, but I sometimes think it's it can be quite disconcerting for someone that's not used to being on the ward to be kind of locked in a room or kind of being taken to the toilet with a person with them. I think it's quite good to be aware if you're new to going into that environment that can be quite disconcerting. That's how I felt the first time.
Well, it's sort of scary, isn't it? I think everybody is a bit sort of like taken aback a bit when they go into a mental health. And it's funny because if you work there, it's sort of completely second nature, and we can't even really see what anyone is scared about. But I mean, people are doing surprising things and saying surprising things, and there's quite a lot of shouting some days. And actually, if you're not used to that, it is quite scary. So you don't really know what's going on.
I think the briefings as well, the morning briefing and post briefing are super important. We're able to speak with professionals in the room and those who know young people perhaps a bit more than we do in
I think the more sort of knowledge you've got helps your confidence, isn't it? The more you sort of think actually know what you're dealing with, because otherwise if you don't know what you're dealing with, it can come as a horrible surprise. Or a nice surprise. that's really negative, isn't it? No, it can be a nice surprise. So on the day, I do think it's important to arrive early so that you're not sort of flustered, and you can get yourself all nicely sorted out before the kids descend. Yes, I think if you're still trying to set up, and I would bring down the sort of 6 kids and say, hi, we've arrived, and you're not really quite ready, that's not a good start. So set up and be organised in advance, and remember that you're a treat. I think you're sort of like, you are something really nice for these kids, and so really sort of think that, hey, this is exciting. And I think if you think that and you know that, that sort of helps you be quite positive. Ensure that you've got all you need. I mean, sometimes we have had people say, oh gosh, I was going to bring such and such and I've forgotten it. And you can't just pop out or even back to your car, because sort of in the middle of all this, it's a sort of ongoing thing. You can't just like leave it for 5 minutes. And so really do try and be as organised as you possibly can. I always think it's good to start off doing some sort of introductory exercise. I don't know whether anyone could sort of think of anything that would be a nice sort of icebreakery type thing to start with, so that you get to know them a little bit, they get to know you. Has anyone ever done anything that's worked well like that at all?
I was assisting on a ceramics workshop, and the artist asked questions like, what's your favourite food? And then we had our hands and we would mould our bits of clay and all put it out.
Yeah.
It was really nice.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
So you just sort of want some sort of icebreakery type thing that probably, if it can be linked to your workshop, that's great, because that sounds like it was. So it's sort of along the same lines, but it's just a bit, I mean, apart from anything else, you need to know their names, they need to know your name, and just very basic introductions. Like I said before, have a selection of activities like up your sleeve, so that you don't stick to plans even if they're clearly not working. That's probably the most important thing I can say to all of you. I mean, it's really hard because actually you will have a plan and you have got things you want to do, but actually if it's not working, it's really not worth sort of ploughing ahead with it and trying to keep flogging a dead horse. So you're aiming for sort of ownership and collaboration with these kids, which is a challenge in itself. But if you can get them to sort of make decisions, come up with suggestions, that's always great. Sometimes at the end of a session, we'll sort of sit down with the artists and they'll say, well, tomorrow we could do 1, 2, 3 or 4, which ones do you like? And that really works well, because then you've sort of got them involved and they can help you make decisions about what they've enjoyed today and what they'd like to do tomorrow. Another thing is try and make each day different. I know that's really hard, but I think the most successful workshops we've had on Aquarius have been the ones that have sort of like have got broader remits. So like the art ones, when we maybe did batik on one day and I can't even remember what, clay the next, and then printing the next, and then something else on Thursday and something else on Friday. They were all sort of artistic and creative, but on the other hand, they weren't exactly the same. I think the photography and the music ones have struggled a lot more, because for the ward staff, we're saying, hey, come down for photography. Yeah, I was there yesterday. no, but it's going to be different today. No, it's not. They're still going to move, still going to, you know. And it's really hard to motivate a child if you're saying, yeah, okay, I do agree, you were there yesterday. Today's going to be more fun and more different. And actually they can see straight through that. So if you can have a slightly different angle each day, that's going to be easier for you and easier for us. Think about music. Sometimes I think it's really nice to have background music so it's not sort of all awkwardly silent. And you're always going to be able to put music on. And don't be put off if the kids lack motivation. They might say halfway through, I've had enough, I'm going to leave. And so I think sometimes you just have to pick your battles and think to yourself, oh, fine, they've been here for 10 minutes or an hour or however long. If you try and get that kid to say, oh, come on, do this, do that. You can try it once or twice, but actually if it clearly isn't going to work, just give up. You've got other kids who really want to engage, concentrate on them. If so-and-so wants to go back to the ward, fine, now the horrible boring time, there won't be anything else going on the ward and they'll regret it and they'll probably stay longer tomorrow. But don't try and really try and keep them there, it's not worth it. So at the end, so you've done your workshop, a couple of hours, it's 4 o'clock. I always think it's really good if you can sort of sit down with them all as a group at the end and say, let's just think about how today's gone and have a sort of recap, end of session type talk. What did you enjoy? What didn't you enjoy? What the kids found especially nice to do or they were especially pleased with. And if you've got staff, I would expect to be asked the same thing. So I'd ask everybody, you know, what did you really enjoy? What was boring or what was fun? And get everybody to say that. You're going to have to do very boring practical things like counting the number of scissors you've got, make sure you've got the same number as you put in the first place. Thinking about ideas for tomorrow, like I said before. I think it's really nice. I mean, we're quite lucky in the classroom because there's lots of space, and also we can leave it there overnight. No one else uses that room. So we can actually have a little display. And at the end of the week, we'll have everybody's work on this little display we've had people take photos of them, and the kids have all been given a copy of the photo, and that's sort of just like a nice sort of positive way of thinking, yeah, okay, I've really got something out of my week. And if they can have something to take away, that's great as well. Obviously, that within reason, we might have to, if they've done, I don't know, made pottery things, they might be able to take them back to the wood, but we'll just have to keep them until they're discharged. Ceramic things knocking around the ward. So, but it is nice for them to have something to take back. We did tote bags and all the sort of tie-dye and printing stuff. They all came back to the ward with something, which is nice because actually they still think about it. They've got their photos and the photography session up on their bedroom wall, and it's nice and affirming, really. And at the end of the session, it's good if you talk to the staff and check how they think it went, any hints that they've got that you think you might want to do something slightly differently tomorrow. And then when you go home, you've got to feel really proud of yourself because it is a challenge. I'm not saying it's an easy way of spending your afternoon. So I think you've got to recognise that you made a difference because you really, really did. That afternoon has been far more fun with you there than it would have been with me running yet another group. And you have, like I said, you've sort of sown a seed of that activity with the kids. And that's really important as well because these kids have had really deprived lives on the whole. And they won't have done lovely creative things. They probably have had dubious school experience. They won't have had much encouragement from home to do anything creative in their hobby time. So really you coming in is an amazing opportunity for them, and I think you've really got to recognise how important and valuable that is. So go home and have a glass of wine, and that's it. So I'm here to answer if there's any questions I haven't covered. I'm quite happy to answer them.
Just going back to the point that you made about feedback circles at the end, I've just found on a few wards it's been quite difficult to get feedback of some form from participants. Do you have like a recommendation of how to structure those circles to kind of optimise that feedback?
Sometimes the sort of open questions are quite difficult, so if you sort of say, oh, how was it? It's a bit like, oh God, what do I say? But if I normally would say, one thing that you enjoyed and one thing you would like to do differently tomorrow, or sort of like make the questions a bit more closed. I think asking for ideas for tomorrow is quite a good one. You know, what do you think you've done enough of today? What can we do differently tomorrow?
Yeah. And do you think, in terms of, also when you mentioned saying that the days are going to be different, and maybe they don't agree with that, do you think it's best to be quite open and honest at the beginning of a project about what the week is going to entail, or do you think it's best to keep it open because of that flexibility?
I think I'd say, well, my aim for the week is that we're going to be doing whatever photography all week, but I'm very open to your suggestions. So my aim would be that, you know, by the end of the week we'll be able to do X, Y, Z. But if anyone's got any ideas, I'm perfectly happy to incorporate them and go along with that. So I think you do need to be sort of honest as well, and to say, yes, you have got a plan. Obviously, you've come with a plan because that's who you are. But on the other hand, it's not set in tablets of stone, which is quite a difficult one to get right, isn't it? But sort of a mixture.
Thank you.
I wondered, with your experience and opinion, you mentioned it a little bit, but about kind of what art form is most successful. And I'm a composer and a musician, and I feel like sometimes that's quite an exposing art form. It doesn't have to be, but people perceive it to be that. And I wondered if you could, talk about the different kind of, do you find a particular art form works really well with this demographic, or do you think it's completely up to the individual and everything can have a purpose and place?
The music one, we've only had one musician. I think he probably found it quite difficult to make each day a little bit different. But it was amazing. We had this kid who was, she wanted to be the sickest child in the world. That was her aim in life, and she probably wasn't far off. But actually, she was a real challenge. But she was able to sing a song to our slightly dubious music that we were all composing with a microphone and get it recorded. And it was just wonderful to hear. And we sent it to her afterwards. She actually left the ward and went somewhere else. But that makes you think, well, even though it was a bit difficult, there was an amazing end result. So I don't think anything is not worth a try. And I think it's especially difficult probably with music to make them a little bit different every day. So I think probably quite a lot of your thought beforehand would be to plan out days that did feel significantly different or a little bit different from yesterday. If you know you play guitar on day 1, you're still playing guitar on day 5, it's going to be really hard for the ward staff to get the child motivated to come down. Whereas actually if you can say, oh, try a different instrument, or we're going to do something a bit different, that would help. But I wouldn't discount anything.
That's great. You mentioned obviously confidence is a big issue, and it's really hard sometimes to gauge confidence growing, even if you know them really well. And talking about how praise is really important. And I've definitely had experiences where you might praise a young person and they just don't respond well to that at all. So do you think it's kind of, even if you sense that it maybe isn't the right thing to do, to be kind of to praise more, or if you kind of get a sense that that's not working, to maybe tone it down? It's really hard to know without knowing that young person if that's actually damaging or not.
It will never be damaging. I think most of them will not want to hear it because their self-esteem is somewhere in their boots. But actually, it's so important still to praise, because even if they won't want to let you see that they've taken it in, because that's who they are, and they can't really believe you. So you just need to do it again and again. It's never going to do any harm.
Do you have any tips on saying, us being flexible and not to feel disheartened if someone's there for like 10 minutes or something, which for them, like Ollie said before, that could be a really massive job for that one person. Then also the balance of like trying to push them a bit and actually without sounding harsh, but like to kind of, like be encouraging.
Yeah.
For them to kind of push it a bit more.
I would definitely expect want you to push a bit, because otherwise, the unmotivated person is going to say, come down, have a look round. No, sorry, no, I'm interested. Go back to the ward. So I think you can always try. Well, if they don't want to do one thing, well, wait, let's go and try this something else. Or why didn't you help me do this? Or why don't you help me put up the lights for the photography session? Or getting them, well, what would you like to do? Is there anything that you've got up your sleeve that you'd like to try? Maybe we can do it tomorrow if we can't do it today. Getting them to sort of feel involved and important is really important. So, last time I was just thinking, we had a girl who really seriously didn't want to join in, and the photographer said, well, actually, I really can't figure out these lights. And she had some, I don't know the technical thing, this silver circle thing that they had. And she sort of said to Jess, this girl, I really am at a loss, I don't know how to make this work. And so the kid spent the next half an hour trying to make it work. And that was great. And then after that, she had some ownership of it. She was then taking photos with this silver thing. And it was all great. And she stayed for the rest of the session. So I think getting them, I know you want to appear as the expert, but sometimes it's really good to say, I've absolutely no clue how to do this. Can you help?
Yeah.
Even if you know how to work. Which you probably will.
Is there a better way to organise group activities, or would you say that it's best to keep it sort of pairs, one-on-one, or is or a range of different interaction styles?
Depends really what you're doing. We've had a mixture. Sometimes everyone's doing the same thing, but individually. Sometimes we've had everyone doing a big project all together and so actually adding to the group project. I think it's probably quite nice to have a mixture. So, sometimes they're doing something on their own that they can then take away at the end. Sometimes they're sort of doing something collaboratively all together, so they're sort of cooperating with a group project of some sort. It probably depends on what medium you're talking about, but if you can have a mixture, I think that's probably the best.
I wonder what your thoughts were on, so when I've done workshops before with young PhD, I've made a space in the room that's not to do with it, but it's like cushions and blankets and comfort, so that when they've gone, I don't want to be here anymore, instead of them leaving the room, it's being directed
That's
to a
lovely
softer
idea,
space.
yes.
Would that be something?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally. Yes, if you can keep them in the room, you might sort of have a little flicker of interest later on, mightn't you?
Yeah.
Whereas actually if they go back to the ward, especially with us, when it's like going back upstairs, they have no clue what's going on, so you're not going to get them back down again, or very unlikely to anyway. That's a nice idea.
Last year I was doing a visual art workshop, and the artists were focused on collage, and one of the individuals really want to do collage, and to focus a bit more on drawing, and the artist was certainly accommodating with that and tried to work with her to push her drawing. She wanted to focus on the anatomy. It's such a specific skill that takes quite a long time to sort of get through that master, and she found that a real challenge. And then she hit this dead end of not making enough progress quick enough, and that really dejected her. And it was then very hard for us to sort of get her back maybe through different activities, because she was so focused
On doing what she wanted to do.
And neither of us knew quite how to sort of pull her back from that sort of drawing dead end that she sort of found herself. And then it had a knock on her confidence. It was a real shame, but I didn't quite know how to manage that.
I would probably try and be realistic, I guess, first, and say, actually, you're not going to become a portrait painter in 5 afternoons.
Yeah.
But and maybe scale it down to say, well, let's just concentrate on a hand. Why don't we just, make it really small? So instead of doing a crowd of people, let's just try and draw your hand. And just make it slightly more doable. I think it's fine to be realistic, because actually that kid clearly had utterly unrealistic expectations. So it's fine to say, no, it doesn't work like that. and try and scale it down so that they can do one tiny thing well.
Yeah. Okay. That's great.
You mentioned earlier about the kind of copycat thing of people copying other young people when they do something. I've noticed this when there might be one really confident person in the room who almost dictates what everybody does in that room. And they might decide, oh, I'm done now, and then everybody follows because that one person is finished. How do you, and it's not always because they all want to leave, but they kind of feel like they have to. So if you have experience of that, how do you kind of encourage them to kind of make their own choices without it making a big deal, or do you have to kind of just let it happen?
That's really tricky. I think I'd probably I'd let the ringleader leave, but then I think I'd try and engage before the other ringleader has left. Try and engage others. Probably when ringleader's out of the room, the others will be easier to engage. So I think if you can just let that person go and try and think about what the others would like to get out of the remaining 40 minutes of the session or whatever it is. Yeah, I mean, you don't want to turn it into a big fight. That's absolutely not what you want. So, or maybe say, I have said in the past, well, why don't we all have a 5-minute break? And then after 5-minute break, try and get a few of them back again. Say we're going to try something different, and why don't you come and see what we've got to do now? That sometimes works. There's no easy answer. Sorry.
No, I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.